Hey, Larkin Rose here, and I will be speaking at Anarchapulco 2024, 2 weeks from this coming Monday. Wow, it's coming fast. So the description below will have a link to where to get tickets and a promo code to save a little bit on those. But my talk there is going to be titled When Humanity Grows Up. Now, it's not titled If Humanity Grows Up. It's not titled, Golly gee, I wish humanity would grow up, damn it. It's when humanity grows up. I think a lot of people, even in the freedom movement, have a very short-sighted, sort of self-centered view of reality and history and the history of ideas and the history of philosophy. We each have our own little, tiny little sliver of experience, which is tiny geographically, like we mostly know the people around us. Some people have gone around the world a whole bunch more, but a lot of Americans, myself included, haven't been abroad very often, so we have our little limited window. And even more so, we have our limited time window in which we've been alive. And so it's easy if that's all you're looking at and you're trying to extrapolate the future from this minuscule little trivial sliver of time that has been your life and decide, well, not much has changed in the last week, so nothing's ever going to change. And that's kind of ridiculous. And so I'll use an example I use very often, the example of slavery. 99 point whatever percent of human history, most people thought slavery was just, that's the way things are, and it's legitimate, and it's legal, and all that fun stuff, including in this country. Now, I have no doubt at all that when some people started to say, okay, I know it's legal, I know we've done it forever, but this is screwed up and evil and heinous, and maybe we shouldn't do it, I guarantee there were people saying, come on. Slavery's been around forever, and even if we don't like it and we think it's horrible, it's never going to change. That's just human nature. We're stuck with it forever. I guarantee there were people who said that. And probably the abolitionists who were trying to fundamentally change the nature of human society and interaction probably were up against that over and over and over again. This is just how things are, whether you like it or not. Tough. This is how things are. This is how things will always be. Okay, so now, if you ask pretty much anybody in the Western world, and in a lot of the rest of the world, but there are still places where slavery is sort of accepted as the norm. I mean, those number of places are shrinking, thankfully. But in the Western world, if you ask somebody, so is slavery inevitable and it's just human nature, or is it profoundly evil and hurrah, we did away with it? Almost everybody is on that side. Now, if you compare the majority 300 years ago, even just 200 years ago, even in the Western world, and said, well, what do you think about slavery? A lot of people would say, well, I think it's sort of horrible and ugly, but that's the way it is. It's the way it's always been. It's probably the way it's always going to be. Most of the people today, at least in the Western world, if you ask them that, say, oh, that was horribly heinous. Thank goodness we're done with that and it's over with. Yay. Was there a difference between those two majorities? Only in when they were born and where they were born. Other than that, they would be the same people. The same people today who can self-righteously condemn slavery, as they should, not complaining about that part. If they were born 200 years ago, they would be the same herd of unthinking, unoriginal sheep who would have been saying, well, this is just how things are. Maybe we don't exactly like it, but it's always happened. It's happening everywhere in the world. It's always going to be this way. So don't make waves. Don't complain. Just, do your thing and shut up and go with the flow. That is what the majority does everywhere in every age throughout all of human history. And so it's easy for the fringe weirdos like the abolitionists who are like, yeah, I know this has been humanity has done this evil crap forever, but it's really not okay. And we shouldn't be pretending it's okay. And we shouldn't be compromising and talking about, well, let's have the masters be a little bit nicer to their slaves. We have to all the way condemn it, top to bottom, front to back. Slavery is insane and evil. End it. Even if most of the world isn't going to listen. In fact, most of the world may attack us and call us utopian and all sorts of other stupid stuff. I have no doubt that they went through that. Now, if they could magically rise from the dead and see today and go, wow, the whole world knows that, well, with few exceptions, the whole world knows that slavery is bad. Unless it's like legalized and called something else, but that's a different issue. As far as like one person saying they own another person, of the 7-8 billion, whatever we're up to on the planet, the vast majority go, that's insane and horrible and evil, and thank goodness that's over with. But the ability to imagine a world like that started with the fringe weirdos who were focused on principles instead of what has always been. And, well, it's just human nature. And, well, this is inevitable. And, like, there's so much power behind these institutions, you'll never beat them. Like, there's so much money in the slave trade and stuff. You're never going to defeat that. You're just somebody, screaming into the wind about how wrong you think it is. You're never going to change anything. But they did. They changed the whole world. And I think it's one of the things that I understand, and I sympathize with the frustration of people, including in the movement, who feel like, well, there's this tiny sliver of us who don't want there to be ruling classes and who recognizes that that's not okay. But there have been ruling classes going back ages, and there always will be, and we're doomed because I've been talking about it for a week and the world didn't fix. Okay? I've been talking about it for 27 years. The world is outgrowing this. The world is absolutely outgrowing statism. Now, as a percentage of the population, still kind of tiny, the number of people who have all the way accepted that statism is insane and immoral and illegitimate, start to finish, no matter who's on the throne, that's a pretty small minority of the population. But that doesn't at all determine what the future is going to be. And this is a mistake I see a lot of people make. They sort of see what everybody thinks, and they think that there's some power behind what the brain dead masses think, who don't think about anything, whether it's today or back when there was slavery or back when they were throwing people into volcanoes to try to make the crops grow better, whatever. The majority never changes anything. The majority is never what matters. They always follow, they don't lead. The majority never leads to a different place, ever, anywhere in history. It is always a small group of people who are determined to drag the herd. Now, there is absolutely a huge amount of what I refer to as mental inertia in the herd, like tons and tons of people believing stupid crap, and it takes time and it takes effort to drag that herd into, for example, recognizing slavery is really bad, we have to not do that. But who will pick the cotton? Doesn't stinking matter, it's evil, end it now. We can bicker about the cotton after the fact. We are at that stage now when it comes to statism, and a lot of people, if they look out and go, well, only this tiny percentage of us believe in actual freedom and non-aggression and voluntarism, and a huge percentage of people believe in statism still, so we're doomed and nothing's ever going to change. Well, that was true of literally every crappy idea that humanity has had, and it took, like, everything from, well, children are just property, and you can, if you get desperate, you can kill them and eat them, and if you're poor, you can sell them, and you can beat the hell out of them and train them like dogs and be, psychologically and physically violent to them all you want, until people started to say, maybe that's messed up and we shouldn't do that. Same thing with, in a lot of cultures, with how women were treated like property in a lot of cultures, and they still are in a few cultures. And so the growth out of that was always the result of a tiny percentage of the population going, yeah, I know we've always done it this way, but this way is screwed up. Let's do it a different way. And so if you're measuring where the world will be in 100 years by where it is now, your prediction powers are going to absolutely suck. In fact, if you're measuring where it's going to be in 100 years by where it has been 100 years ago, your prediction powers are still pretty sucky. Unless you're observant enough to notice the things that actually fundamentally change about how most people view the world. And so events like Anarchapulco, where this percentage of fringe weirdos who doesn't want a ruling class gets together, part of that, if you're not aware of how these things actually change in humanity, which is slowly and awkwardly and stupidly and frustratingly inefficiently, I'm not pretending that overnight everyone's going to go, oh, okay, yeah, that makes sense. No, it's a slow, arduous, annoying, ridiculous process. But if you're not even aware of how society changes its mind, which is always the result of a tiny percentage of people dragging the rest of the world in the right direction, well, sometimes it's a tiny percentage of people dragging the world in the wrong direction, like the idiotic, insane idea of communism. It was still a bunch of people going rah, 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 and then a bunch of followers going, that, I guess, and then getting excited about it. So it's not like it's not like the minority is always in the right or always going in the right direction. But in this case, the fact that, I mean, and I can see it in my lifetime. My lifetime is like 0% of human history. Like my entire lifetime is basically nothing, like 55 years of nothing compared to the however many 100,000 years you want to call it humanity. And like, depending on how far back you go and what species you're going to count as like, were Cro-Magnon? Do they count as human? Neanderthals? Were they human? I don't know. I've never had a chat with one. But even if you're just counting like Homo sapiens, it's been a pretty damn long time. And for most of that, the attitude was sort of the animalistic attitude of, oh, if it's a tribe over there and they have stuff, let's go kill them, kill the males, maybe steal the females, at least steal their stuff, steal their land, fight them. And that's just sort of normal until weirdo freaks started to say, what if we like didn't do that? What if we got along and like voluntarily traded? And that's been a back and forth. Like it's been forever for people to figure that out. And it's not, we're still not done because we still do the government version. In their day-to-day lives, most people now know, yeah, it's not okay to attack people and steal their stuff. But most people have been taught that if you do it by way of government and voting in democratically elected constitutional republics, then it's magically okay to have somebody else rob your neighbor on your behalf and give you the loot. But the fact that on an individual basis, most people don't think that is progress. The fact that the ruling classes have to lie through their teeth and do all these pseudo-religious rituals to try to pretend that the thuggery and the theft that they do is legitimate and necessary and that's okay and it's moral and stuff. The amount of propaganda needed to do that is actually a good sign, because it used to be that if you just go, hey, there's a tribe over there, they have some stuff, there's more of us, or we're bigger than them, let's go kill them and take their stuff. Most people will go rah, 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 and go do it. Like that's most of the history of humanity. And now, like the propaganda they have to do to their own soldiers, you go through Marine boot camp and they just openly smash the individuality and moral conscience out of you to try to make you into an unthinking robot in the machine. They don't even hide it. Like it's really damn obvious. Whatever you were before, we don't care. We are going to train you to go, sir, yes, sir, I will do whatever you say because I'm an unthinking idiot of the ruling class. Yay, I'm so proud. They have to put in that much effort, and there are still times when the people who have gone through that just massive, obvious, direct torture and mind control to make them into robots, they still go, this is messed up. I don't want to do this. Like at some point, the order comes in to do something and that's just kind of too horrible. I'm not going to do it. Now, sadly, that doesn't happen nearly as often as it should, but it still happens. And that's as depressing as that is, that's a good indication that it now takes that much effort for the parasitic psychopaths to train their enforcers to be unthinking enforcers. It used to just be, hey, I'll give you stuff if you go kill him and bring me half his stuff. Okay, let's go. That was most of history, and now it isn't. And again, I want to finish sometime the video I want to make about the evolution of the concept of self-ownership and individual rights. Now, it wasn't called that, But you can see, if you look at the philosophy, and it goes back for ages, a lot of it was in like Western culture, came from Rome and Greece, and then over to the British Empire, and then over into the stuff that the founders talked about in the beginning of the US. And the whole time it was mixed in with authoritarian violent domination. So when people go, yeah, America's land of the free, Western culture freed us, they also like conquered and murdered a bunch of people and enslaved a bunch of people. And so if you're just going to go Western culture equals good, you're an idiot. But it is true that built into Western culture, those ideas of individual liberty grew more than anywhere else in the world, as far as I can tell. Now, if you have some indication of them growing somewhere else, by all means, show it to me. I'm not attached to the Western culture thing, and a lot of Western culture is bogus. But the evolution of like live and let live and the non-aggression principle, and even like Christianity is a huge part of that, completely aside from whether you believe that Jesus was the Son of God or that the Bible is holy or anything like that. Just the fact that gazillions of people resonated with a book that was about this guy who said, you've heard that it said, love your friends and hate your enemies. Well, I say unto you, love your enemies. Pray for them who persecute you and all that. Like, that's really weird. But a lot of people are like, I think he has a point. And like, turn the other cheek. Like, maybe we should be trying to de-escalate and not be at war with each other. And let him who is without sin cast the first stone. Maybe instead of being violent, judgmental jackasses, we should live and let live and try to persuade people with words instead of rocks. And the fact that that resonated with so many people and still does, that's part of the evolution of what I call the birth of actual humanity, where people figure out how to be like moral people who are considerate of each other. And whether they think in these terms or not, they recognize, well, I own me and you own you, and we shouldn't be violating each other's consent, or we shouldn't be committing aggression, or however you want to describe it. The evolution of those ideas has come a huge way. And that's the thing, is when people point to government and say, well, there's still government, there's still warmongering, so we're just doomed. And they don't recognize the progress that has happened in the mentality and the viewpoint and the philosophy of normal people, even over just the last few centuries. They're missing 99% of the progress, because at this point, for most people, they only cheer for violent aggression when it's done by way of these stupid rituals and called law. In day-to-day life, they're not at all okay with like, hey, our family should go like kill them and steal their house. It's schoolhouse. Most people will go, you're bonkers, and we're all going to join in with the person you're attacking to help defend them. That growth of the mentality of the general public is 1 billion times more important than whatever political monstrosity is still stuck on top of society. And that has been growing by leaps and bounds, including in my own lifetime. Like the militarism and the blind nationalism in the US was way, way, way higher in my lifetime, where you don't criticize the troops. Yes, I do. They're mindless thugs of an authoritarian ruling class. If I had said that 40 years ago, all good Americans would condemn me. Just in my lifetime. And even the idea of like, well, you don't have to like people smoking pot, but it's kind of messed up to kick down their door and point guns at them for that. And a lot of people now recognize that. And that's why a bunch of the marijuana prohibition has been falling apart. It's not because politicians decided to be nice. It's because people more and more were drifting in the direction of, it's really messed up to kick down somebody's door and send in a SWAT team because they have a plant that politicians said they weren't supposed to. It's not even like a plant that makes them violent. Like compared to alcohol, which, that used to be illegal too. But alcohol, a lot of people get violent when they drink alcohol. That's still legal. And the being violent isn't. And most people recognize, well, you don't like kick down someone's door and point a gun at their face because they had a beer. Now, if they're beating the hell out of their wife or if they're driving around negligently endangering everybody, okay, then you have to do something to protect the innocent, but you don't just violently attack them for having a beer. And they tried alcohol prohibition and it fell apart because people were like, yeah, this is messed up. We don't like that form of authoritarianism. And the same style authoritarianism when aimed at marijuana is falling apart all over the US and falling apart all over the world because people are like, that's screwed up to escalate that to violence because some guy is going, hey man, in his basement. Like, who gives a crap? It's not okay to use violence against that guy. And more, that is the mentality of the general public, and that is what matters. And so we've been aimed in the direction of anarchism, even when the vast majority of people have never seen that end line. They just more and more believe in privacy. Now, a ton of normal people, if they're stopped by the cops, will go like, I don't have to let you search me, and I don't have... That's a new development in humanity. It used to be if the king's soldiers show up, you let them through your house, you answer any questions they have instead of like, screw you, I didn't even do anything wrong. No, you can't search it. Now, you may get beat up by the cops anyway, but most people aren't going to go, well, you disobeyed the king's guards. They're going to go, that guy with a badge is a piece of crap. Because of the mentality shift. And the fact that that general mentality shift doesn't mean that most people today recognize government as inherently illegitimate, which it is. It doesn't mean that, but it means they're a hell of a lot closer to being able to comprehend that than when they thought, my country, right or wrong. Literally, even if we're the bad guys, I'm going to root for us. Like, wow, that's screwed up. Most people don't say that anymore. And most people don't blindly, like, oh, look, another video came out showing U.S. troops committing murder. Now, a bunch of people will make excuses and say, well, that's just an exception, or what's the context, or blah, blah. But even they're not just like, yep, we're okay with that. They just fabricate stupid excuses, whether it's soldiers doing it or cops doing it. Well, what's the context? Or it's just a few bad apples. At least it's to the point where they're saying those are bad apples instead of, well, you should have done as you were told. Now, there's a few people who are, no matter what, you should have done as you were told. Okay, but that's not the majority. That's not society in general. And so, anyway, the whole point of this is that the mentality and just general viewpoint of how people view other human beings and how they think human interaction should go in their day-to-day lives is already 99% voluntarist. They just still believe in the mythology of a ruling class and authority and legislation and all that crap that creates in their mind an exception. Well, if you use violence by way of legislation and voting and democracy and blah, 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 then it's okay. But that's the remaining sliver of statism. But the view of reality of most people, especially in the Western world, is 99% voluntarist already. That's how they think and that's how they behave in their day-to-day lives. So yeah, doing away with that last sliver, it's not going to happen in 5 minutes. But it is absolutely going to happen. Humanity is absolutely going to grow up. And those of us who've been pushing this whole time, like, unless I get Clintoned, I intend to be alive when we get to the point in the not too distant future where there are large areas of land that don't have ruling classes and that have people there who understand self-ownership enough that if somebody goes, well, I'm your new ruler, they say, no, you're not, go away or die, because you're not committing aggression against us and we're not going to fall for your BS because now we see through it. And then a lot of the rest of the world is going to have to learn by example because they can't fathom actually being grown-ups where they're not bowing to a political master. But that's a different thing. But that's why my talk is when humanity grows up, not if. It's absolutely going to. It's 100% inevitable. I would like to speed it up as much as possible and nudge it along wherever I can. But yeah, and I understand why people are pessimistic, but if you zoom out and see the whole timeline of humanity and watch the shift in mentality and philosophy and morality, even among people who don't even think about that stuff, like the masses who, like, they don't philosophize, but they still think, hey, that guy beats his wife, that's not okay. That's a relatively new development, sadly enough. That person thinks he owns that other guy. That's messed up. That's a relatively new development. And we're not that far from people going, yeah, the people in government, why do they have rights we don't? Like, why is it okay for them to use force in situations where it's not okay for us to do it? That's all it takes. If humanity thinks about that, the entire concept of authority falls over, because the entire concept of authority is those people have special rights. They're allowed to violently dominate the rest of us, even when we didn't threaten or hurt anyone. So anyway, I will be at Anarchapulco. I hope some of you will see me there. Yeehaw, I'll have books and I'll be hanging around. My talk is the end of Monday, the 12th, and then I'll be hanging around on Monday and Tuesday and Wednesday and part of Thursday. I'll find some place, like I always do at these events, which will be my little niche under a bush or next to a rock or something, under a pile of chaos after the hurricane that hit there. And then I'll just be chatting with people, and I'll have books. I'll have The Most Dangerous Superstition, and I said them backwards, and the Jones Plantation novel. So I hope to see some of you there. But whether or not you're going to be there, I really encourage anybody who believes in freedom to back up as much as you can. Don't look in terms of this year versus last year. Look in terms of decades and centuries and millennia, until you notice how far humanity has come and how tiny that last little step is. I mean, it's a big step for people to go through, but compared to the progress they've already made, it's kind of a tiny step for people to go, hey, maybe nobody has the right to rule me or anybody else. We are that close. Like, society is that close. Not just weirdos who like to think about stuff, but actual humanity is that close. And I know it doesn't feel like it because they still have that indoctrination and it has roots deep in their brain. But there's a reason I'm more optimistic than most of the people I know in the freedom movement. And I think it's because they're still looking at the tiny sliver of time that they've lived in, instead of looking where we came from and how far we've come and the inevitable momentum of where we're headed. And that is a stateless world.